Hello everybody, my name is Elizabeth Tegart and I'm your Grace-Based Leadership Development Facilitator for this session. I'm so pleased to have been invited. Thank you so much for allowing me to come. I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself and then we'll move right into the presentation. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from Grand Canyon University. I have an Associates of Science in Business Administration from Brown Mackie. I'm certified in servant leadership and I have a certificate in Christian education. I have about 20 years in faith-based nonprofit organizations serving in administrative roles in Arizona, Missouri, and New York. I'm also a single mom, homeowner, and volunteer extraordinaire. I volunteer wherever I'm asked for the most part, which is youth mentorship and volunteer worship leader. I am passionate about healthy, holistic, godly leadership practices, and this is the premise for the concept that I have worked to develop and that I want to share with you today. Why a grace-based approach in leadership matters is because approach predicts outcomes. Approach in everyday interactions shows us from the get-go what the outcome is likely to be. This is visible in many interactions, and the only caveat to this would be if a follower is educated in emotional intelligence or something to that effect that allows them to function above the reactionary outcomes that generally accompany interpersonal interactions. So if you would, visualize with me for a moment a memory of being awakened for church or school, some event with a deadline where mom, dad, or a guardian was eager and anxious to get out the door in time. Remember the effect that that had on you. Visualize, if you would, how it was determined that you would be the one to stand in front of a classroom to do anything. How was that determined, and what effect did that have on you? Chances are that you'll be able to see in these memories how a leader's approach with you predicted some level of the outcome that would be experienced. Placing ourselves in the position where an authority figure's approach determined the outcome that we experienced helps us to posture for empathy and compassion with those we lead. And that's the purpose of the memory practices that we've just gone through. The chosen approach with others throughout our lives sets up either a positive experience that builds skill and confidence, or it sets up a negative experience that results in doubt and a self-defense domino effect. Leaders influence and teach in a number of ways. And first, let's look at exempling. Leaders influence and teach by example, and sometimes they're exempling what not to do. And in grace-based leadership, that's okay. So to contextualize the interpersonal outcomes of a leader's approach, it's important to remember the well-known default modes for self-defense, which are fight, flight, or freeze. And in more recent years, we've also been taught that these default modes for self-defense include fawn and flop. Fawn is a very accommodating approach, being everyone's best friend, super willing to change and adjust to accommodate everybody. Flop is sort of that self-destructive mode where failure is the only outcome. And sometimes the approach of a leader in adult life triggers these exact self-defense and survival responses because demands are made on persons who do not have the skill to perform in the ways that are expected. Grace-based leadership methods, however, operate in ways that meet the other person where they are and invite them forward, offering to teach and develop them on the journey, understanding that they may not have the skills on board. Leaders influence and teach through presence. So presence being the second point that we'll examine together in this session. Influence comes with presence, which allows followers to develop traits and imitate what and who they have access to. Imitation can only occur when a leader is present, approachable, relatable, and trustworthy. Followers will experience these leadership characteristics when leaders are present, not when leaders are perfect. Nobody's perfect. And a fragile leader will create a lot of distance between themselves and followers because they do not want their imperfections to be seen. But at all stages of life, success and failures, people imitate what they see as helpful in life. And grace-based leaders develop environments where people can grow in the ways that they have idealized. Leadership is not control or manipulation. Healthy leaders invite, they do not demand. They allow followers to choose their path for development and the rate at which they develop. Leaders serve and facilitate. They do not control and manipulate. Leadership requires humility because a leader has the best interest of others at heart. Their decisions will unabashedly reveal the process that they go through for dealing with challenges. And this opens pathways for followers to take on the characteristics that do predict success. A super important way to serve. Presence over perfection matters so greatly. Willingness to share struggles matters so greatly. Leaders actively influence and teach through engagement. Leaders meet followers where they are, inviting and engaging them in a growth process that the follower desires for themselves. Communication, verbal and nonverbal, is a basic need in organizational life, and this is what provides for the invitation and the engagement for followers. Communication provides for the transmission of knowledge and behavior, requiring all team members at all levels to be actively engaged from entry level to officer level. And leaders who engage in respectful communication do demonstrate the integrity and dependability, competence across the spectrum of stakeholders from officers to entry level employees. This is so important for grace-based communication from leadership because intercultural competency and grace-based leadership both seek to understand the other person as opposed to imposing upon or demanding from the other person. And then, of course, finding points of agreement and alignment in that conversation factor where the leader can help facilitate growth and development. So the approach and style of management is a major factor in the level of employee engagement, which we see through many, many authors that write on the subject of leadership. It's important for us to understand that top-down leadership is characterized by telling and judging rather than by inviting and engaging. And this style is based in a foundation of care for the organization's bottom line rather than being concerned at all with the individual needs. And so grace-based leadership really does challenge that traditional style of hierarchical leadership, which is so prevalent in so many of our organizations. And grace-based leadership involves making procedures and processes accessible to followers to develop the follower and the leader, but also to develop the policy and the procedure which serves well the organization. Leaders actively influence and teach through adjustment. Leaders challenge current systems based on their experience and observation of how adjustments may improve outcomes for the people and the organization, all the stakeholders. Leaders note the need for change and set about doing the hard work that is necessary. Leaders are known as change agents, and sometimes they will work within limitations that may be necessary. Other times they will challenge the limitation to be able to develop the system and the process that is inhibiting optimal outcomes for everybody involved. And these decisions that the leader makes toward change are based on their desire for a healthy system for all the stakeholders, from the entry-level employee to the officer, to the customer, and the organization, and all the people involved in between. Leaders do not mind standing alone, and they do not mind offering change through service versus asserting the need for change. It's so important for leaders to be willing to make that call and stand on their own when necessary. So as leaders work on adjustment, adjustment shows up without condemnation, and this is the graceful approach to change. It might sound like this. We've tried this approach and it did not produce the results that we need. So what other approach might serve our team, our organization, our goal well? What other adjustments, what other approach might allow us to reach our optimal outcomes? And this concept of adjustment without condemnation allows for real-time tracking of holistic approaches, again, serving all the stakeholders involved. Since leaders actively teach and influence through service, we know that it is important to take a posture of servanthood. Service does not occur without a leader posturing in humility. So for further discussion and further development, I submit to you that grace as a term and a practice is not relegated to religious circles. A majority of the material available out there using grace as a concept and as a practice is tied to religion, to faith-based authors, faith-based organizations. But grace can be embraced in the broader context of society, and we will be served well by realizing that the word grace is regularly used in other sectors: sports, dance, art, communication, and the list goes on. One way to talk about grace in the broader context is to set up a sentence like, blank is evidence of grace in blank. For example, movement is evidence of grace in football. Form is evidence of grace in dance. How about discipline? Not punishment, but discipline is evidence of grace in parenting. Grace in the arts, such as theater and dance, as well as sports, help us to realize that grace has a broader context beyond the limits of religion, so that we can meet our non-religious neighbors, co-workers, and friends in graceful spaces that we create intentionally with our dedication to building healthy, life-giving environments. Thank you so very much for your time and attention. Together, we can develop the seed of leadership for service to all of our stakeholders. My contact information is on this screen, and if you'd like to scan my QR code, it will take you to my personal website where you will see updates about this material as well as my contact information if you should choose to get in contact for future services. Thanks again for your time and attention. May God bless you, and let's lead with excellence.